Well, welcome to the African History Network show. It is Monday, May 17th, 2021, and we are live. So we know we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, of May 31st and June 1st, 1921 in Greenwood, North Tulsa, the town where African Americans lived. And in that town, you had a business district called Black Wall Street, which began at the intersection of Greenwood, Archer, and Pine, Black Wall Street. So the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre is coming up, and the Oklahoman, the publication The Oklahoman, has a story dealing with how the U.S. Congress is going to discuss the Tulsa Race Massacre as 100-year anniversary approaches. The U.S. Congress is going to discuss the Tulsa Race Massacre as the 100th year anniversary approaches. So there's going to be a hearing in the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. That's going to take place on Wednesday, May 19th. Okay, you're going to hear more about that. We're going to discuss some of this on today's show, dealing with the Tulsa Race Massacre, 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. We'll talk about this hearing in the House Judiciary Subcommittee that's going to take place on Wednesday, May 19th. The oldest living survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre, Viola Fletcher, just turned 107 years old last week. She's going to testify at this hearing, and she's expected to discuss the lawsuit that was filed in 2020 against the city of Tulsa and Tulsa County, the Tulsa Regional Chamber, the Oklahoma National Guard, and others. Okay, so we're going to discuss some of that on today's show. Then, speaking of Oklahoma, we know that Governor Kevin Kitt, governor of Oklahoma, we know that he was kicked off, Governor Kevin Stitt, I should say. Governor Kevin Stitt was kicked off the committee for the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. He was kicked off the commission. Tulsa Race Massacre Commission boots Oklahoma governor for signing racist legislation. And this deals with Governor Kevin Stitt, Republican. He's the governor of Oklahoma. He signed legislation. This was Bill 1775, HB 1775, which bans the teaching of critical race theory in Oklahoma, in the schools in Oklahoma. So he was kicked off the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission, the 100th anniversary commission, because of this. We'll talk some about that as well. Once again, we have critical race theory in the news, critical race theory being attacked by many people who don't want to talk about the history of racism, don't want to talk about systemic racism, don't want to teach about the history of slavery in schools, etc. And you have to ask the question, what are they so afraid of? What are they so afraid of? Okay. Now, speaking of being afraid, there's a story, oftentimes we hear these stories. In Maricopa County, we see the recount taking place. They called it a fraudit. It's a fraudulent audit. Okay. We see the constant attack on the voting rights of African Americans. We see this constant attack. We see 361 voter restriction bills in 47 state legislatures across the country being pushed by Republicans. And then they keep pushing this big lie about widespread voter fraud in the 2016 presidential election, widespread voter fraud in the 2016 presidential election. But when you ask them, okay, where's this widespread voter fraud? Okay, I'm not talking about one or two people voting twice. Where's this widespread voter fraud? They can't show you examples of it. Even Attorney General William Barr at the time, who was handpicked by Donald Trump to be his Attorney General, he even said there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. But we do, for instance, if you look at this article right here from Washington Post, because I've got the evidence, proper documentation ends all conversation. We look at this article from the Washington Post. Despite GOP rhetoric, there have been fewer than 24 charged cases of voter fraud since the election. Despite GOP rhetoric, there have been fewer than 24 charged cases of voter fraud since the election. One person has faced charges for every 10 million votes cast. Where's the widespread voter fraud? Republicans, where is it? Read this article here from May 4th, 2021, from written by Philip Bump for the Washington Post. Despite GOP rhetoric, there have been fewer than 24 charged cases of voter fraud since the election. So if there was all this widespread voter fraud that they keep lying about exists, don't you think there would be more charges? Don't you think there'd be more charges? But what we do see being charged is we do see Trump supporters who are being charged for voting twice. So you have this case here of this man in Colorado. TheRoot.com has an article dealing with this. We're going to pull this up from The Root. I posted it on my Facebook fan page today. I asked the question, where's all the Republicans that talk about widespread voter fraud or voter fraud at all? Where's all the Republicans pushing for recounts of elections, things like this? Why aren't they talking about this? Okay. I wanted Trump to win. Man charged in wife's murder illegally cast her ballot for Trump, officials say. Okay. This is a guy who allegedly killed his wife and then cast a fraudulent ballot on behalf of his wife for Donald Trump. Where's Rudy Giuliani? Where's Marjorie Taylor Greene? Where's Sidney Powell? All the organizations that filed 61 lawsuits claiming voter fraud and all this stuff in the 2020 presidential election. Why aren't they jumping all over this? Where are they? I want to hear from all the black conservatives running around, pissing Republicans behind. All the black conservatives, all the Candace Owens, all the black conservatives that talk about voter fraud, all this stuff. Why aren't you talking about this case? I wanted Trump to win. Man charged in wife's murder illegally cast her ballot for Trump, officials say. Now, this is written by Stephen Crockett for TheRoot.com. I'm not a big fan of The Root. You all know that. But they do have some good articles every now and then. We're going to look at the article from Washington Post because I read that article as well. Susan Morphew had been missing since May 10th, 2020, yet a ballot was mailed in with her name on it, casting a vote for Donald Trump. Quote, there's posters all over our town, Lori Mitchell, the clerk and recorder in Chaffee County, told the Washington Post. Quote, constant things in the news about her. There's people at the grocery store passing out flyers. Now, Lori Mitchell said the small Colorado community of 20,000 people was shocked. They were shocked when Morphew went missing. But she was even more shocked to see a ballot submitted in her name. While the signature line was blank, the witness line was signed by Morphew's husband, Barry. Oh, Barry loves him some Trump. I'm waiting for all the Republicans. Have you seen them? Okay, have you seen them? You remember the song? Have you seen her? And then it was sampled by Hammer. Have you seen them? Okay, FBI tip line. Okay, so is this one of the people that's gonna make America great again? I just want to know, aren't the Republicans, aren't they supposed to be the family? Aren't they supposed to be the party of family values? Aren't they supposed to be the party of family values? What type of family values is this? Okay. There's a joke in there somewhere about dying to vote, but we ain't gonna go there. But anyway, so Washington Post has an article about this as well. Right? So I'm just sitting back looking. I'm just waiting for all these black Republicans that are jumping out talking about all this voter fraud and the big lie. They're pushing the big lie, and we need all these voter restriction bills, things like this. I'm waiting for Tim. Is Tim Scott going to talk about this? Because Tim Scott, April 28th, Wednesday, April 28th, 2021, Tim Scott delivered the GOP rebuttal to Joe Biden's speech to a joint session of Congress. And Tim Scott talked about how the Republicans support bills to make it easier to vote and cut down on fraud. Show me the fraud that you're talking about. Are you talking about this right here, Tim Scott? Show me the fraud that you're talking about. Read this article here from Washington Post. Now, I want people to understand, right? In the 2020 presidential election, there was only one presidential candidate that encouraged his supporters to vote twice. That was Donald Trump. In the 2020 presidential election, there was only one candidate. Okay, you remember there was like 26 candidates running for the Democratic nominee. There was some running for the Republican nominee, Joe Walsh, Mark Sanford. They didn't get much traction. Okay. Bill Weld, I think it was, former governor. He ran previously on the independent ticket, Governor Bill Weld. Okay. So there were Republicans running for the Republican nomination. They knew they weren't going to win. They knew Trump was going to win, but they were trying to give Trump some competition. There were 26 running for Democrats to be the nominee. Out of the 3 plus Trump on the Republican side that got any notoriety, that got any media attention, and the 26 on the Democratic side, there was only one who encouraged their voters to vote twice, and that was Donald Trump. And some of his supporters listened. So you got this genius right here who got caught, man charged with wife's murder, illegally cast her ballot for Trump, officials say. Quote, I just thought, give him another vote, end quote. What a genius. These are people that are going to make America great again. Are they now? See, this is the mindset of the geniuses that were there at the storming the U.S. Capitol building on January 6th, 2021. This is the mindset of these geniuses that was storming the U.S. Capitol building January 6th. And then you have Representative Andrew Clyde, Republican from Georgia. We talked about him on the show last night and talked about him May 14th on Roland Martin Unfiltered. When you had the House hearing that took place last week, he said if you didn't know that the footage that you were watching from January 6th, it just looked like a regular tourist visit. Yeah, but we found out that you were in the House chambers barricading the door. You were inside the House chambers barricading the door because the domestic terrorists were outside trying to get in. What type of normal tourist visit is that? Or did you mean to say normal terrorist visit? Which one is it, Representative Andrew Clyde? Come on, Andy. Come on, Ange. The county clerk immediately knew something was strange going on last fall. A mail black ballot had arrived for Suzanne Morphew, a woman missing since May. But one thing I say about Donald Trump, he does have some diehard supporters. I say that. Yeah. For a long time, she said it was something fishy that her office reported to law enforcement. Then Barry Morphew was charged this month with murdering his wife. This week, things got stranger still. Barry was also accused of casting his wife's ballot in a fraudulent vote for Donald Trump. Now, this is what I've been saying all along. I've been saying this all along. We're coming up on a break. So you have Republicans saying, oh, Democrats rigged the election so Joe Biden will win. So you're saying they rigged the election, but they let Mitch McConnell win re-election in Kentucky for the U.S. Senate. They rigged the election, but they let Lindsey Graham win re-election in South Carolina. How is it that you had Republicans win re-election and they're on the same ballot? And in the House of Representatives, you have Republicans, 200 of them won re-election. Are we to believe no fraudulent votes were casted for Republicans? Is that your argument? No fraudulent votes were casted for Republicans? We're going to deal with this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
For 25 years, the Black History 101 Mobile Museum has carried on the rich legacy of the Black Museum movement in America by showcasing original artifacts of the Black experience at colleges, universities, K-12 schools, corporations, libraries, conferences, and cultural events, making it the most traversed Black History mobile exhibit in American history. Dr. Khalid El Hakim is the founder of the Black History 101 Mobile Museum, and he is a highly sought-after public speaker on topics of Black history, social studies, education, museum studies, hip-hop, and race relations. Dr. Khalid was named among the change makers for NBC Universal's Erase the Hate campaign and listed as one of the 100 men of distinction for Black enterprise. He recently founded the Michigan Hip Hop Archive on the campus of Western Michigan University. The Black History 101 Mobile Museum is currently scheduling in-person and virtual exhibits nationwide. For more information, please contact Dr. Khalid Al Hakim directly at 313-645-4197, 313-645-4197, or visit their website at blackhistorymobilemuseum.com. That's blackhistorymobilemuseum.com. You can also email him at bhistory101@yahoo.com, bhistory101@yahoo.com.
We all know the cannabis industry is headed toward an uprise in the past decade. What happens when there is a brand that brings this uprise in a blow? The cannabis industry welcomes her uprise. Hustle her hemp. Delivering excellence with pride is her watchword, and how you choose to embrace it makes it a priority. From cultivating rich cannabis into exquisite and tastefully finished CBD products to delivery, Hustle Her Hemp leaves no stone unturned. Hustle Her Hemp's mission is to empower women of color by building business and creating legacies, uniting beauty, health, and business. We are a pure definition of how we want the CBD industry to become in the future. While we are redefining innovation, we bring the same energy to improving the quality of life. Hustle Her Hemp is the new uprise.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Monday, May 17th, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. We're going to talk about the hearing that's going to take place in the House of Representatives on Wednesday, May 19th, dealing with Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Race Massacre. We're going to talk about that. We're going to deal with this case here dealing with voter fraud among a Trump supporter. Voter fraud among a Trump supporter. We're going to go to this. We're going to stay on this one. We're going to go to this story first. I'm about to go to clip one, Shakita. We're going to go to the story first. Then we're going to go back to Black Wall Street, because I got this information up. I want to jump right on this right now. All right. So we'll talk about this as well. We'll deal with Governor Kevin Stitt being kicked off the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission because he signed a bill in Oklahoma to ban the teaching of critical race theory as well. Then also in the Daunte Wright case, okay, out of Brooklyn Center, Daunte Wright out of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. Two developments there. The police officer who is accused of killing Daunte Wright, Kimberly A. Potter, her trial has been given the green light. Kimberly A. Potter, the former Minnesota police officer who is charged with manslaughter for fatally shooting 20-year-old Daunte Wright, is set to stand trial at the end of this year. A Minneapolis judge ruled on Monday, May 17th, 2021. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then also the Brooklyn Center City Council. The Brooklyn Center City Council approved sweeping police reforms in the wake of Daunte Wright's death. This took place on Saturday, May 15th, 2021. The Brooklyn City Council voted 4-1 on Saturday afternoon to dramatically reduce the power of its police department in a sweeping new measure. Brooklyn Center, a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Daunte Wright died after being shot by an officer who said she thought she was holding her taser rather than her handgun. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. That's a big development there. Okay. Now I want to stay right on this topic here, dealing with this voter fraud from Trump supporters, because all the talk I hear from all the Republicans and all the Republicans in the state legislatures, they're saying that they keep pushing this big lie that there was rampant voter fraud and the 2020 presidential election was stolen from Donald Trump. There's rampant voter fraud. So we need to have all these new voter restriction bills to cut down on the, they say it's widespread voter fraud. Okay. They're not producing cases of widespread voter fraud. There was 61 lawsuits that they filed in court. Basically all those lawsuits were thrown out. There was one that they won in Pennsylvania, and that one that they won in Pennsylvania that dealt with how close poll watchers could be to poll workers. Okay, that's what that was. Now, there's another case, though, that a lot of people don't talk about. This case is out of, which one is this one here? Let me bring this up. This case is in Pennsylvania. Okay, this case is in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to, we've got this article here. Yeah. Let's look at this one here from Washington Post. This deals with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania man admits he voted for Trump in dead mother's name. There's another one. They love them. They're dying for Trump, aren't they? They love them some Trump. Pennsylvania man admits he voted for Trump with his dead mom's name. Quote, I listened to too much propaganda. You think? How is it they see the light after they get caught? How is it they see the light after they get ran over by the bus? This is what's happened to some of the insurrections January 6th. They said, we showed up. We did what Trump told us to do. Trump is, he's just going to let them hang. But these are some of the same people that said, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. Pennsylvania man, I'm waiting for all the Republicans. They keep talking about all this widespread voter fraud. And the 2020 presidential election was rampant with voter fraud. Why aren't they talking about these cases here? Pennsylvania man admits he voted for Trump with his dead mom's name. Quote, I listened to too much propaganda. You think? This is May 4th, 2021. Jacqueline Pizer, Washington Post. Weeks before Election Day, Bruce Bartman, not to be confused with Bart Simpson, the Bartman. That's the real Bartman, Bart Simpson. This is a different Bartman, okay? Weeks before Election Day, Bruce Bartman mailed his mother's absentee ballot with a check mark next to President Donald Trump's name. The problem was his mother had been dead since 2008. Uh-oh. They say, where's Rudy Giuliani? Or Rudy's trying to, Rudy's lawyering up. Rudy's in trouble. Where's Matt Gaetz? Oh, Matt Gaetz is in trouble too. Sugar Daddy Matt Gaetz, he's in trouble, okay, as well. Matt, you should leave those girls alone, all right? I'm trying to tell you. He said Matt Gaetz probably wants to go into witness protection right about now because his boy just cut a deal with the feds. Oh, oh, it's going to be a whole lot of them running for cover. It's going to be a whole lot of them running for cover. Bruce Bartman, 70 years old. Now, he's old enough to know better. See, these are dumbasses that sit up and watch Fox News all day and then call in the 9:10 a.m. superstation with this nonsense. You feel free to call into this show. I got something for you. 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600. It's the calling number if you have a quick question or comment. Bruce Bartman, 70 years old, pleaded guilty on Friday. This is back earlier this month, to a charge of felony perjury and unlawful voting. And he blamed his decision to cast a fraudulent ballot on consuming too many false claims about the election. You think maybe you've been consuming garbage, Bartman? You think maybe you've been listening to people that were lying to you? Okay, were you watching Fox News? Were you watching Newsmax? Now, Bartman said, I was isolated last year in lockdown while apologizing to the judge for his crime, the Associated Press reported. He said, quote, I listened to too much propaganda and made a stupid mistake, end quote. Yeah, let's just look at this. Okay, hold on. Let's just back up for a minute, all right? Let's just back up. Let's look at this for a minute. A stupid mistake is like, I mean, it's a lot of stupid mistakes you can make. Committing voter fraud is not a stupid mistake. Okay? Stupid mistake, I shouldn't have gone over her house that night. Stupid mistake is like, I shouldn't have been driving over the speed limit. How do you cast a vote for your dead mother in the 2020 presidential election, and she's been dead 12 years? I want to make sure I understand this. There were millions of people that voted in the 2020 presidential election. You thought the vote that you cast for your dead mom was going to put Donald Trump over the top. You do realize that's a 5-year felony, right? When you commit voter fraud like that, that's a 5-year felony. So I want to make sure I understand this, Bartman. I want to make sure I understand this. So you're going to cast a vote for your dead mother who's been dead for 5 years, and you're going to cast one vote and risk going to prison for 5 years for a man that don't know you and don't care about you? This is how stupid some of these people are. I can understand being isolated because of the pandemic. I mean, well, I couldn't get out like I wanted to, things like that, but I ain't doing no stupid stuff like this. I'm waiting for all the Republicans that are claiming voter fraud and the ones that claim the insurrection didn't take place, and all the people that were there January 6th, they were just hugging and kissing police, all this stuff. Why are they so silent on this? What all the black conservatives, all the black Republicans that keep talking about voter fraud, why aren't you talking about this? Maybe it's because your master hasn't given you permission to talk about it yet. Maybe that's why. So Bartman said, I was isolated last year. And let me pull this back up here. Now, this is in Pennsylvania. He said, I was isolated last year. He said this while apologizing to the judge for his crime. He said, quote, I listened to too much propaganda and made a stupid mistake, end quote. Now, Samuel Stretton, Bartman's attorney, added in court that his behavior was, quote, very misguided, a very misguided political mistake and very stupid, end quote. But what else could you say? Yeah, you're going to say, yeah, he was stupid. But he's 70 years old. He's old enough to know better. It's not like he's 18. This dude's old enough to know better. Now, after sentencing him to 5 years probation, leaving him unable to vote for 4 years, Common Pleas Court Judge George A. Pagano noted that Bartman's crime, quote, goes to the heart of our democracy, according to the Inquirer, but also commended him for taking ownership of his crimes. Well, what else could he say? I mean, look, they get. How should I say this so it doesn't sound crazy? They give white people credit for admitting that they screwed up. When it's like, what else you gonna say? You gonna say somebody fraudulently? Are you gonna say somebody held a gun in my head and made me cast a fraudulent vote for my dead mother? Or are you gonna say it was the spirit of Christmas past? No, this is what you're gonna say. You're gonna come up with the Geraldine excuse. The devil made me do it. Is that Flip Wilson Geraldine? You're gonna come up with the Geraldine excuse. The devil made me do it. What else you gonna say? You're in court, penalty of perjury. So yeah, you're gonna tell the truth. Of course, you're gonna admit it. after sentencing him to 5 years probation, leaving him unable to vote for 4 years. Common Pleas Court Judge George A. Pagano noted that Bartman's crime, quote, goes to the heart of our democracy, according to the inquiry, but also commended him for taking ownership of his crimes. What else is he going to do? He's going to say, it's the spirit of Christmas past that made me do it? Of course he's going to say, yeah, okay, yeah, you got me. I did it. I voted for my dead mom. She died 12 years ago. I was listening to too much propaganda on Fox News and Newsmax and all this other stuff. And I was isolated and I didn't know what else to do, you know. So I voted twice for Trump because I thought this vote for my dead mom was going to put Trump over the top and he was going to stay in office. Now, as the traitor-in-chief Donald Trump has doubled down on his false claims of widespread voter fraud, especially in battleground states like Pennsylvania, Bartman's case is among the few proven instances of wrongdoing. Oh, there are other cases of Trump voters voting twice. I noticed Donald Trump doesn't talk about that. The other... Shakita, we all right? There's a commercial playing. Are we okay or what? Can you hear me? Come on air. Let me know what's going on. We all right? Okay. I'm going to keep going. Let me know. Just come on air. Tell me, everything okay? All right. Statewide investigations have debunked Trump's claims of broad wrongdoing and led to dozens of dismissed lawsuits. This is about 61 dismissed lawsuits. Okay. Prosecutors in half a dozen key swing states have only pursued charges in a handful of cases in addition to old Bartman's, the Washington Post recently reported. And look at this article here from let's go back to this one here. This is dealing with this one deals with only a handful of cases prosecuted. Let me flip back over to this one. Despite GOP rhetoric, despite all these lies they're telling, despite GOP rhetoric, there have been fewer than 24 charged cases of voter fraud since the 2020 election, where there was 150 million people plus that voted. Joe Biden got 81 million votes. Donald Trump got something like 74 million. There's 150 million plus who voted. There's been fewer than 24 charged cases of voter fraud. One person has faced charges for every 10 million votes cast. I'm still trying to figure out why they're not talking about these Trump supporters that keep voting. Keep voting twice, okay? So we've got Bartman in Pennsylvania. And then you got this article here from MSNBC. Now, we've talked about some of these stories here in the past, okay? I'm waiting for all these Republicans to start talking about this. Trump voter in Pennsylvania convicted of voter fraud. As a Trump voter in Pennsylvania is convicted of casting a ballot for his dead mother, whatever happened to the reward money offered by Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick? Okay, so now this is very interesting, right? Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has offered $1 million for anybody who could provide evidence of voter fraud in the 2020 election. Well, you got 3 cases of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, but old Dandy Boy hasn't paid up. In the wake of Donald Trump's defeat 6 months ago, Republicans launched a desperate search for illegally cast ballots to help justify the GOP's conspiracy theories. But despite all the hysterical rhetoric, only a handful of legitimate allegations have been raised, and some involve Republicans casting illegal ballots for Trump on behalf of their relatives. And some involve Republicans casting illegal ballots for Trump on behalf of their relatives. So they talk about Bartman, okay? And then let's see, the Washington Post report added in the, okay, so talk about Bartman there. They talk about two other men in Pennsylvania face charges of fraudulently voting for Trump. You got 3 cases of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and all 3 of these culprits voted for Donald Trump twice. Ralph Thurman of Chester County allegedly tried to cast his son's vote, and Richard Lynn of Luzerne County allegedly attempted to obtain an absentee ballot for his deceased mother. Both cases are pending. Now, my first thought after seeing this news was to remember the case of Crystal Mason. Now, Crystal Mason is an African-American woman. Crystal Mason, who cast a provisional ballot in the 2016 presidential election while on supervised release for a federal conviction, and her provisional ballot did not even count. She didn't know she was ineligible to vote, and her ballot was never counted. But Crystal Mason, an African-American woman, was convicted of illegal voting and sentenced to 5 years in prison. You got Bartman, who's a white man, 70 years old. He's sentenced to 5 years probation. He admitted to fraudulently voting, casting a fraudulent ballot for his dead mother, who's been dead 12 years. Crystal Mason was given incorrect information when she went to vote by a poll worker and was told that she could vote. So she did. She cast a provisional ballot that did not count. She got sentenced to 5 years in prison. They talked about this on the Rachel Maddow show. They talked about this case on the Rachel Maddow show from May 5th, 2021. Let's go to this clip, Shakita. Clip 1. Take it off mute.
See if you can spot the difference between these 2 stories. Here's story number 1. 2016, a woman in Tarrant County, Texas, named Crystal Mason went to a local polling place to vote, but she discovered her name wasn't on the voting rolls there. At the suggestion of a poll worker, Ms. Mason filled out a provisional ballot. She was told, basically, we're not sure what the problem is, but fill out a provisional ballot instead of a normal one. That way, if there is any real problem here, we won't count it. A few months later, Crystal Mason was arrested and charged with illegal voting because when she filled out that provisional ballot, she was on supervised release after completing a prison sentence for a federal conviction. She thought because she had served her time in prison, she was then eligible to vote. She didn't know that under Texas law, you're not eligible to vote until you have also completed any probation or supervised release after release from prison. Even though it was a technical and sort of complex misunderstanding, and even though her provisional ballot was never counted, she was nonetheless convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison for illegal voting. 5 years in prison. That's story number 1. Here's story number 2. In Delaware County, Pennsylvania, a man named Bruce Bartman filled out a voter registration application for his mother last year, even though his mother had been dead for a dozen years. Mr. Bartman then requested and submitted an absentee ballot in her name with a vote for Donald Trump for president in 2020. The state of Pennsylvania flagged his mom's voter registration as belonging to a dead person, but he signed and sent back a letter swearing that she was actually still alive. He did all of that in order to deliberately cast a fraudulent vote for Donald Trump. He pled guilty to it in court. He was just sentenced. He got 5 years probation. So can you spot the difference? Crystal Mason in Texas tries to vote because she doesn't know that she's not technically eligible. Her vote is never counted, 5 years in prison. Bruce Bartman in Pennsylvania, elaborate premeditated scheme to cast a dead person's vote for Donald Trump, including swearing that the person wasn't dead after he started to get caught, all is forgiven, 5 years probation. I know there has to be something that explains the radical difference in prosecution and punishment of these 2 people. I just can't quite put my finger on it. Meanwhile, 2 other Republican gentlemen in Pennsylvania are also currently facing voter fraud charges. One guy who, just like Bruce Bartman, registered his dead mom to vote. Another guy who went and cast his ballot at his local polling place. and then came back 45 minutes later wearing sunglasses to cast a ballot in his son's name. Somehow an alert poll worker saw through his brilliant sunglasses disguise. Voter fraud is very rare. There are a few instances of it here and there. They're usually ridiculous. After the November election, when Republicans were having trouble finding any actual examples of the giant epidemic of Democratic voter fraud they were fantasizing about, they were sure had just taken place, Republican Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, publicly offered a $1 million reward for anybody providing evidence of voter fraud in the 2020 election. For months now, his counterpart in the great state of Pennsylvania, Democratic Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, has been needling Dan Patrick about this. When are you going to cough up that $1 million? I got 3 cases of voter fraud right here in Pennsylvania. 3 Trump supporters, Dan. Where's my money? One was a guy casting a ballot for Trump in his dead mother's name. Not the kind of evidence you had in mind. I got a second one of those too, if you want to try that.
Now to the conversation we've been.
Okay, I don't know what's going on with the clip. All right, just stop it right there. Okay, thanks. So here you have Bruce Bartman. It's Bartman, not Bartman, but looks like Bartman to me. Bruce Bartman and Crystal Mason. Okay, spot the difference in this story. All right, read this article here from MSNBC. Trump voter in Pennsylvania. Trump voter in Pennsylvania convicted of voter fraud. Okay, Trump voter in Pennsylvania convicted of voter fraud. Let's flip over to this here. Trump voter in Pennsylvania convicted of voter fraud. And, you know, they talk about, we've dealt with this before in Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick of Texas offering this challenge, offering $1 million to anybody that can produce evidence of voter fraud. Okay. But Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman has been trying to get Dan Patrick to pay up because he said we have 3 cases of documented voter fraud here in Pennsylvania. In all 3 of the cases, the people voted for Trump. Where's my $3 million? Okay, Dan Patrick is silent. Okay, he's sounding like the black Republicans. They keep talking about voter fraud, but they don't want to talk about these cases here. Okay, he's silent like that. So read this article as well. Okay, all right. I want to go to the story that we talked about at the top. How's everybody doing? I want to remind you all, you can still register for the online course that I teach. If you like the information that I cover dealing with history here, if you saw a Sunday show, we dealt with a Sunday, May 16th show. We did an extensive show that dealt with slavery and the Mexican-American War of 1846 and how the Mexican-American War and the outcome of the Mexican-American War, this led to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which in 1848, which ended the Mexican-American War. And the U.S. got the territories that make up California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada. And they got that for $15 million from Mexico. And Mexico lost about 1/3 of their land. But this gave the U.S. more land to, in some of these states, to have slavery in some of these states. Also, in 1845, Texas became part of the Union as well. We know Texas won its independence from Mexico in 1836. And Texas is going to be one of the Confederate states and join the Confederacy because Texas entered into the Union in 1845 as a slaveholding state. But the Mexican-American War is then going to lead to what's known as the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 consisted of 5 bills. One of those bills was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which then intensified slavery, and it allowed the authorities in northern states to deputize white people, especially white men, to help recapture runaway slaves in free territory, free northern territory, and take them back into slave territory like the South. So this caused for the runaway slaves and those on the Underground Railroad, things like this caused more of the runaway slaves to then go into Canada. All right. So we dealt with that on Sunday show. So you can still register for the online course that I teach on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Kemet's one of the original names for Egypt. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Maafa is a Kiswahili word, which means the great disaster, which refers to our Holocaust, the transatlantic slave trade. So I teach this on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a visual presentation. We do have a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips, etc. We do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. You'll still have access to the class even after the course is over with. As soon as you register, you can watch this class we just did this past Saturday. So if you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, right on the homepage, we have the information for the radio show. We're 6 days a week, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight, Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can click here to listen to audio podcasts of these broadcasts. We're on 9 different audio podcast platforms: iHeartRadio, FM Player, TuneIn, iTunes, Stitcher, Castbox. I'm on 9 Blog Talk Radio. I'm on 9 different audio podcast platforms. So wherever you get your audio podcast from, search for the African History Network show. You can read articles that I write. Click right here to read articles. This is the show I did March 15, 2021. We dealt with Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B performing WAP at the Grammys. The Grammys have gotten 1,000 complaints. Also, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, has gotten 1,000 complaints, rightfully so. I go through and break all this stuff down and deal with negative corporate control hip hop. And then it has the information here for the online course. Okay, so next class is Saturday, May 22nd, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can watch from around the world. Click right there to register here. Takes you to the next page. Click on enroll. Class is regularly $130, on sale $80. As soon as you register, you can start watching the content. You can watch the class we just did this past Saturday. All right. Okay. So we have that now. I want to go to dealing with Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the Tulsa Race Massacre. So there's going to be a hearing, and some people say reparations now. You know my response to that: reparations how? Explain to me the process. You need 218 votes to get any bill passed in the House of Representatives. They don't have 218 for H.R. 40 or any other reparations bill. When I had Cam Howard here on the show from Cobra, and we talked about the hearing that took place in the House of Representatives, just took place, I think, in April. There was between 173 and 190 votes for H.R. 40. You need 218. You're still short. You need 60 votes to get a reparations bill passed in the Senate. I doubt very seriously you don't even have 40 votes in the Senate. You don't even have all Republicans that are going to, or you don't even have all Democrats that are going to vote for it. Joe Manchin of West Virginia is not going to vote for reparations. He's not even going to vote for a study for reparations. You need 60 votes. That means even if all 50 Democrats vote for it, you still need 10 Republicans. Name me the 10 Republicans that are going to vote for it. Senator Tim Scott, the Black Tea Party Republican, he said he's already voting against reparations. Mitch McConnell's not going to vote for it. Mitch McConnell, when he was Senate Majority Leader, he said reparations is dead on arrival in the Senate. Mitch McConnell's great-great-grandfathers, they owned collectively 14 slaves. 12 of them were female. I don't know what that was about. Well, I possibly do, but we're not going to go there. Mitch McConnell's not going to vote for it. Sure, name me the 10 Republicans in the Senate that are going to vote for reparations. I'll wait. Name me 5 Republicans in the Senate that are going to vote for reparations. I'll wait. While you Google the names of Republicans in the Senate that are going to vote for reparations, let's look at this story here. Congress to discuss Tulsa Race Massacre as 100-year anniversary approaches. Congress to discuss Tulsa Race Massacre as 100-year anniversary approaches. So on Wednesday, May 19th, in the House of Representatives, the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties, there's going to be a hearing about the Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, the oldest living survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921, and we know in North Tulsa, this is where Black Wall Street was, is among witnesses scheduled to testify Wednesday, May 19th, 2021, before a congressional subcommittee exploring potential legal paths to compensate survivors and descendants. Okay, now they have never been compensated. Okay, they've never gotten any type of restitution. Viola Fletcher, who turned 107 years old last week, is expected to discuss the lawsuit filed in 2020 against the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Tulsa County, the Tulsa Regional Chamber, the Oklahoma National Guard, and others. Two other plaintiffs in the lawsuit, Leslie Rando and Hughes Van Ellis, are also on the witness list of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. Okay. Now, those watching on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Keep watching. We're going to keep broadcasting for a few more minutes. Keep watching. Though we're out of time here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. We'll be back tomorrow. Remember, right now, let's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. We're kind of forever. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace. Thanks for tuning in. Stand by. Stand by, everybody. Okay, let's continue here. All right, how's everybody doing? We've got everybody shut his broadcasting on social media platforms. You won't find a lot of this information many other places. We've got Derek, we've got Loretta, Tracy, John Ray. Visit his website, workingwithjohnray.com, workingwithjohnray.com. We've got Robert, Christine, just a few of the people watching us, okay? And you all know I'm all for reparations, but I'm also for laying out what this process is to obtain reparations. I don't confuse activity with productivity. Okay. I'm all for, let's deal with the process to actually obtain reparations. The bottom line is the earliest you're going to get H.R. 40 passed in the Senate is going to be 2023 after the new Senate is sworn in. Which probably be January 3rd, 2023, something like that. It's not going to happen with this Senate right here. You're not going to get 10 Republicans to vote for it. That's all there is to it, which means you're going to have to vote more people into office that support reparations and vote people out of office that don't support it. It's a math issue. It's understanding math. You need 60 votes in the Senate to get H.R. 40 or any reparations bill passed, period. You need 60 votes. Okay, unless you do something with the filibuster, that's not going to happen because Joe Manchin's not going to vote for it. Don't know if Kristen Sinema's going to vote for it. You need one Republican to vote for it. I'm not sure if that's going to happen in this 117th Congress. You need one Republican in the Senate to vote for it. Joe Manchin's not going to vote for it. You need 51. You need a 50-50 tie so Kamala Harris could be the tiebreaker, Vice President Kamala Harris. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. Maybe it will. Maybe lightning to strike twice in the wheel. I don't see that happening. Not in this 117th Congress. So what do? You got to vote more people in the office that support these issues and vote people out of office that don't support the issues. To get to 60, and I would say 60 plus 1 or 2, because if Joe Manchin stays in the Senate in West Virginia and he's not up for re-election in 2022. Okay. If you got 61 Democrats, even if Joe Manchin votes against it, you still have your 60 votes. This is understanding strategy. All right. Okay, let's continue here. So the hearing that's going to take place Wednesday, May 19th, dealing with the Tulsa Race Massacre. The hearing to be held at the U.S. Capitol comes less than 2 weeks before the 100th anniversary of the massacre. Now, this year, quote, this year marks the centennial of the Tulsa Greenwood Race Massacre, yet the survivors and their descendants have never received direct compensation for massacre-related harms, end quote, the subcommittee's hearing announcement says. Now, this is the second hearing by this subcommittee. The same subcommittee held a hearing in 2007 on the same subject after the U.S. Supreme Court upheld lower court rulings that a federal lawsuit seeking damages for survivors and descendants was barred by the statute of limitations. Okay, this happened in 2007. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld a lower court ruling that a federal lawsuit seeking damages for survivors and descendants was barred by the statute of limitations. A bill to allow victims to seek a determination on the merits of their federal claims never made it out of the committee that year. Now, the pending lawsuit was filed in the state in state court under Oklahoma's public nuisance law. Okay, the pending lawsuit was filed in state court under Oklahoma's public nuisance law. It seeks unspecified damages for the public nuisance of racial disparities, economic inequalities, insecurity, and trauma. Okay, it seeks unspecified damages for the public nuisance of racial disparities, economic inequalities, insecurity, and trauma caused by the defendants in 1921 that continues, quote, 99 years after the massacre. Okay, that continues 99 years after the massacre. All right, just a second here. Okay, we've got Holly. How you doing, Holly? Loretta. Okay, John Ray posted his website there, workingwithjohnray.com, workingwithjohnray.com. He has some financial strategies for you at workingwithjohnray.com. Now, this is attorney Damario Solomon Simmons. We're both in a documentary together, Resurrecting Black Wall Street from Your Black World Films. And he lives in, he's an attorney there in Tulsa. Tulsa attorney Damario Solomon Simmons, who is leading a legal action seeking damages for Tulsa massacre victims and descendants, is expected to testify before a congressional subcommittee on Wednesday. Okay. Now, Damario Solomon Simmons filed a legal action, and a representative of Human Rights Watch, which is helping on the case, are also on the witness list for the subcommittee hearing. Now, the U.S. House and Senate Judiciary Committees have resolutions pending that recognize the centennial, the 100th anniversary, on May 31st and June 1st, 2021. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a Democrat of Texas, and Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, are the main sponsors of the resolutions. Now, the House resolution condemns, quote, past and present efforts to cover up the truth and shield the white community, and especially state and local officials, from accountability for the Tulsa Race Massacre. Okay. The House resolution from the House of Representatives condemns, quote, past and present efforts to cover up the truth and shield the white community, and especially state and local officials, from accountability for the Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, I can just hear a lot of Republicans now saying, oh, this is divisive. Why don't you just leave the past in the past? This was 100 years ago. Why are you talking about this? Why you're trying to make white people feel guilty? No, we're dealing with the history that you don't want to deal with. We're dealing with the history, and these people were never compensated. See, this is the same. See, this is an example of how elections have consequences. This is an example of how elections have consequences. Okay, what do I mean by this? Well, let's look at the $26 billion in subsidies that white farmers got from the Trump administration. Okay. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack, when he was interviewed by Washington Post, March 25th, 2021. We've talked about this a number of times here on the show. This deals with how racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack says only 1/10 of 1% of Trump administration's COVID farm relief went to African-American farmers. Only 1/10 of 1% of Trump administration's COVID farm relief went to black farmers. So Tom Vilsack said, of those who identified their race or ethnicity, black farmers received only 20.8 million of the nearly $26 billion in 2 rounds of payments under the coronavirus food assistance program announced by the Trump administration in April 2020. African-American farmers got 1/10 of 1%. And African-American farmers have been talking about discrimination coming from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the federal government for 100 years. African-American farmers have lost 92% of their land, 12 million acres of land. And this is largely due to discrimination when it comes to being able to get loans from the federal government. Okay? Tom Vilsack, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, said we saw 99% of the money going to white farmers. We saw 99% of the money going to white farmers and 1% going to socially disadvantaged farmers. And if you break that down to how much went to black farmers, it's 0.1%, 1/10 of 1%. He said, look at it another way. The top 10% of farmers in the country receive 60% of the value of the COVID payments. And the bottom 10% receive 0.26%. Is right at about 1/4 of 1%, 0.26%. The top 10% of farmers in the country received 60% of the value of the COVID payments. And the bottom 10% received 0.26%, or 1/4 of 1%. Okay? Now, of the 3.4 million farmers in the United States today, only 45,000 or 1.3% are African Americans, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That's down from 1 million African American farmers 100 years ago because of widespread land loss. They've lost 12 million acres of land over the past 100 years. Okay, now, so then when you take action and you put policies in place to address 100 years of discrimination coming from the federal government, then you have people like Lindsey Graham who want to call that racism. So if you look at the $5 billion that's in the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that only Democrats voted for, not a single Republican in the House of Representatives or in the U.S. Senate voted for the American Rescue Plan. They want to make America great again, but they don't want to vote for the American Rescue Plan. If you look at this article here from rawstory.com, and we talked about it numerous times here before, this is John Wesley Boyd Jr., president of the Black Farmers Association. He's calling out spineless Lindsey Graham of South Carolina because Lindsey Graham is calling the $5 billion in loan forgiveness for African-American farmers and Hispanic farmers and Asian American farmers. He's calling that racism. And Lindsey Graham is ignoring the previous 100 years of racism and discrimination against non-white farmers. Lindsey Graham is silent on the almost $26 billion that white farmers got in 2020 from the Trump administration and how African-American farmers were largely locked out of that. They got 1/10 of 1%. Lindsey Graham is silent on that. Not only that, Lindsey Graham has 6,000 African-American farmers in South Carolina, and he's not doing anything for them. That's not me saying that. That's what John Wesley Boyd Jr. said. Read this article from rawstory.com. Black farmer Lindsey Graham must apologize for racist comment about subsidies kept from farmers of color for years. So when you have, see, I've said before, America needs a massive history lesson. America needs a massive history lesson. This is why the 100th anniversary of the commemoration of the 100th commemoration or 100th year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. This is why this is so important to deal with this history. And you still have a lot of people in America that don't know the history of Tulsa. Now, and there's a lot of white people. There's some African Americans, of course, because many of us don't understand history either. These will be some of the same people who will cry out about the $5 billion going to African American farmers and farmers of color. These will be some of the same people that tell African Americans to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. But that's not how you did it. You don't want to talk about the aid that you got from the federal government. You don't want to talk about the subsidies you got from the federal government. You don't want to talk about massive land giveaways like the Homestead Act of 1862. They gave about 245 million acres of land, largely to white people. John Wesley Boyd Jr. Let me see. Can we close this? Is that okay? John Boyd Jr., president of the National Black Farmers Association, called Lindsey Graham out for his claim that subsidies for the community are nothing more than reparations. Lindsey Graham said this is nothing more than reparations. He called it races and things like this. Over the last century, black farmers have lost almost all their land and have been blocked from federal programs often given to white counterparts. Now, people like Lindsey Graham don't talk about how African American farmers were largely shut out of financial programs from the federal government for the past 100 years. And that almost all went to white farmers. Then when you try to put policies in place to address the inequities, then people like Lindsey Graham want to call the remedies racist. Now, John Wesley Boyd Jr. was interviewed by Reverend Al Sharpton on Politics Nation. They have the video of the interview in this article. John Boyd Jr. said, "I want to reiterate that since 1910, black farmers have lost 92% of their land, some 12 million acres, largely due to systemic racism." So you have these Republicans who don't want to talk about systemic racism, what it is and how it works. Then when you put policies in place to address systemic racism, they want to call the policies racist. Okay, so read the rest of this article here, okay? All right, now, hold on just a second. Let me try to close this out. Okay. John Wesley Boyd Jr. said, "I want to reiterate that since 1910, farmers have lost 92% of their land, some 12 million acres, due to systemic racism." So some of the same people that want to shut down conversations about systemic racism then don't want critical race. They want to attack critical race theory as well. All right, now let's go back to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the survivors, the victims and survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre never being compensated. The House, this is from the Oklahoman, the Oklahoman.com, newspaper there in Oklahoma. The House resolution condemns, quote, past and present efforts to cover up the truth and shield the white community and especially state and local officials from accountability for the Tulsa Race Massacre. It also condemns the continued legacy of racism, including systemic racism and white supremacy against black people in the United States, particularly in the form of police brutality. Now, look at this right here. None, N-O-N-E, NAN 1, none of the Oklahoma members of Congress are co-sponsoring the resolutions. None of them they're all Republicans. There's none in the Senate, none in the House of Representatives are co-sponsoring these resolutions. Well, wait a second. Don't you represent all the people? Don't you represent the people of Oklahoma? You don't just represent the white people in Oklahoma. You don't just represent the Republicans in Oklahoma. You represent everybody in Oklahoma. So why aren't you co-sponsoring this? Okay. It's estimated that the attack led to hundreds being killed and thousands left homeless in Tulsa's Greenwood district in 1921. Now, I'm going to teach an online course. I think it's going to be June 1st. I'm going to teach. We're going to teach an online class June 1st. Probably be about a 3-hour class. I think we're going to do 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, dealing with the whole history of Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Race Massacre, all of that. Okay, so you hear more about that. You can register for that. I think it's going to be $10. You register for that. I've done a lot of research on Tulsa. I've done a 2.5-hour lecture dealing with the history of Black Wall Street and things like this. So I'm going to incorporate a lot more information into it as well. It's a deep history. It ties into the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We know Tulsa, Oklahoma was founded by Creek Indians around 1836 who get pushed off their land in southeastern United States because of the Indian Removal Act of 1830 signed by President Andrew Jackson. We talked about this on, let me see, a couple of days ago. Which show was that we dealt with? The show I did, African slaves were on the Trail of Tears along with Native Americans. We talked about it in that show because the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians all owned African slaves, and they went about a third of the people who were on the Trail of Tears were people of African descent, okay, because they were slaves of the 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans. And the the Creek Indians go into Tulsa with their African slaves, okay? And Tulsa, the word Tulsa is derived from the Creek Indian word Talasi, okay? So this is a deep history. All right, so you'll find out more about that. The online class I'm going to teach dealing with the history of Black Wall Street, and we'll do it the Tulsa Race Massacre, all of that. All right, now, also speaking of Tulsa, we see that the governor of Oklahoma got himself kicked off the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission. News1.com has an article dealing with this. And this is after Governor Kevin Stitt signed a bill banning critical race theory. Okay, he signed a bill banning critical race theory, even though there's no widespread effort to teach critical race theory in schools. He did it anyway. This is a lightning rod. This is a rallying point for Republicans, because they're not presenting in general policies that are beneficial even to their constituents. They're not presenting in general economic policies that are beneficial to their constituents. Some of them even trying to take advantage. Some of them are even trying to talk about the positive aspects of the American Rescue Plan, and some of them are trying to take credit for the American Rescue Plan, but none of them voted for it. So let's look at this one here. News1.com has an article, and let's pull this up here from News One. The governor got himself kicked off the Tulsa Race Massacre commission. Okay. So let's look at this here. The response to the state's new anti-critical race theory law came ahead of the Tulsa Centennial. Let's flip over. We've got this pulled up now. Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, see, this is an example of how all of this deals with history. To understand policies that need to be put in place, to understand what's going on today, you have to understand history. All this is based upon history. Tulsa Race Massacre Commission boots Oklahoma governor for signing racist legislation. The response to the state's new anti-critical race theory law came ahead of the Tulsa Race Massacre, written by Noah Changa, May 15, 20, news1.com. Okay, and if I can close out some of these damn ads. Okay, just a second here. So ahead of an event marking the 100 years since the Tulsa Race Massacre, the group tasked with planning the centennial removed the Oklahoma governor from its committee. The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Commission reached a consensus on the matter, according to local news. While the commission did not expressly state the reason for his removal, the move comes after Governor Kevin Stitt signed Oklahoma's version of Trump's 1776 misinformation, the 1776 Commission, and the 1776 report that Trump commissioned and that he published. Governor Kevin Stitt signed Oklahoma's version of Trump's 1776 misinformation in the form of an anti-critical race theory bill. Members of the committee urged the governor not to sign the bill. Faith leaders, educators, and other committee members reached out to the governor asking him not to sign the bill, but he did it anyway. The Black Wall Street Times, let's see here, let's close that out. The Black Wall Street Times editorial board was among those demanding that Governor Kevin Stitt, Republican, of course, be removed for his willing participation in making the anti-critical race theory bill a reality. Despite their differences in opinion, the commission was gracious in its statement. Governor Kevin Stitt clearly learned nothing about grace and gratitude. Even after his removal from the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Commission, Governor Kevin Stitt learned nothing from the past week. Instead of reflecting on the impact of his decision, Governor Kevin Stitt doubled down. This is what he said. I guess you could argue that he's full of Stitt. I guess you could argue that, right? It is disappointing to see an organization of such importance spend so much effort to sow division based on falsehoods and political rhetoric 2 weeks before the centennial and a month before the commission is scheduled to sunset, read a statement from Governor Kevin Stitt's office. Now, dismissing the actual concerns communities had about the passage of HB 1775, which bans the teaching of critical race theory. This is another example of Governor Kevin Stitt being out of touch on matters of equity. Last week, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt explained his motivation to signing the controversial bill HB 1775 And he explained it dealing with feelings, not facts. And yet there is no legitimate public purpose or valid argument to support the passage of laws like Oklahoma's HB 1775. The attack on expansive discussions of racial justice and equity predates former President Donald Trump, but his rhetoric and policy framings fanned the flames of this current iteration of revisionist history. Governor Kevin Stitt was given the option to resign early in the week. Oklahoma's News Channel 4 reported the commission said a letter resigned from the commission, not resign as governor, resigned from the commission. The commission sent a letter to Governor Kevin Stitt asking him to step down or clarify his intent regarding his commission's goals, regarding the commission's goals. The statement read, the Centennial Commission feels that your signature on the bill, HB 1775, at this critical time when Oklahoma should embrace its history, is diametrically opposite to the mission of the Centennial Commission and reflects your desire to end your affiliation. So they have the official statement here. So the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission continued to question Oklahoma's Governor Kevin Stitt's understanding of reconciliation and restoration, giving his signing of the bill that promotes an educational environment. Giving his signing of the bill that promotes an educational environment that avoids both concepts, that avoids both reconciliation and understanding. While Governor Stitt maintains the new law would not prevent teaching about the Tulsa Race Massacre, the new law would not prevent teaching about the Tulsa Race Massacre and other events such as the Trail of Tears, the bill could limit the scope and veracity of conversations of these events and others. The Centennial Commission is moored with its work, including the Remember and Rise event on May 31st, 2021. Okay, then they have a list of full events here also. Read this article here from news1.com. Tulsa Race Massacre Commission boots Oklahoma governor for signing racist legislation. This is from news1.com, May 15th, 2021, by Anoa Changa. We'll post this link here. So all this ties into history. Okay, how you doing, Shirley, Loretta, M. Miles? Okay. No, we don't have transcripts of the online class, but you can, you'll have access to it. You can watch it over and over again. You'll still have access to the online class even after the class is over, even after the course is over with. You'll still have access to it. But there's a lot of articles, about 50 articles that I cite, and I'm incorporating new information even from the class I taught February and March of this year, because there's new discoveries that have come out. So there's about 50 articles. So I give you the links to the articles. It's about 50 articles. There's book references. I have a whole PowerPoint presentation. It's like almost 150 slides in the PowerPoint presentation. So it's a ton of information. Okay. Okay. So this, let me see here. Where are we? We got that. Now, we've talked about critical race theory before. I want you to check out this article. I don't have time to get deep into it because we're already over time. This one here deals with the how Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. This is from NBC News. How Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. Okay. We're going to post the link here again for the 9-week online course that I teach on Saturdays. We'll post the link there again. And it's on the homepage of our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Let me pull this one up from NBC News. Okay. Okay, let's pull this one up. This gives background information on how critical race theory became a wedge issue, and because most Republicans can't even explain to you what critical race theory is. Okay, and we've talked about this before here a number of times on the show. And critical race theory is a legal analysis on the premise that race is a social construct that is used to oppress people of color, especially African Americans, as opposed to a natural biological feature. Okay. And it's dealing with understanding racism. Okay. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. And racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, benefits, privileges, land, access to education, access to opportunity, media, jobs, etc., and they use this to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. Okay, this is what racism is. Racism has nothing to do with not liking people, calling people racial epithets, or anything like this. So this article here from NBC News gives background information on the attack on critical race theory, how Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. Republican lawmakers across the country have proposed bills to ban critical race theory in K through 12 schools. Here's what that really means. Okay, there's no real effort to teach critical race theory, especially in high schools. Okay, that's usually at the college level, graduate level, and in law schools, college graduate level, and in law schools. That's basically where you find critical race theory taught. This picture here is very interesting. A Nays, 26 years old, who wants to remove the Emancipation statue in Lincoln Park in Washington, D.C., argues with the man who wants to keep it on June 25th, 2020. Okay. So this statue here, this is Abraham Lincoln and the slave. Now, very interesting history dealing with this statue. FaceToFaceAfrica.com has a article dealing with this. The former slave in the let me see, it's FaceToFaceAfrica.com. The former slave in the statue is a ancestor of Muhammad Ali. FaceToFaceAfrica.com had a article about this. So did Washington Post. Let's look at this here quickly. Let me flip over to this article. Did you know the freed slave kneeling before Lincoln was Muhammad Ali's great-great-great-grandfather? Okay, in this statue here, the Emancipation Memorial in Washington's Lincoln Park. Okay, now this statue was paid for by freed slaves, and we actually talk about this in the online course I teach, because it's the picture of the statue is in an article from TheATlantic.com from February 2018, February 1st, 2018, which talks about the study from the Poverty Law Center that you hear me talk about a lot, called Teaching Hard History American Slavery, Teaching Hard History American Slavery. And the study from the center, and I have the study here somewhere. Hold on. I'm trying to reorganize all this stuff here. And though I've got thousands of articles here printed up, so I'm trying to reorganize some of this stuff and throw some things out. But the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center called Teaching Hard History American Slavery, it documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. Okay. It documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. So you can download this study from splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center. You can download the study. It's free. It's about a 52-page study. I took it to the printer and got it printed up. And one of the things that the study does is it has a survey of 1,000 high school seniors. And it goes through and it documents how little these 12th graders, these high school seniors, actually know about the history of slavery. The reason why this is dangerous is because they're going to grow up to be adults, okay? And they're going to be doctors, they're going to be attorneys, they're going to be politicians writing laws that impact people. And let's see, we talk about it here. Let me see. Is it here in the it's in the preview. Okay, it's in the preview of the class. Pull up the preview. Okay, 1 hour preview of the online course. We have that slide in there. So this is why the history is so important. The way people treat a people, the way people treat you is largely based upon what they know about you. What they know about you is largely based upon what they've been taught about you. What they've been taught about you is based upon what they've read, heard, and seen about you. So when you have people who don't understand the history of African Americans, don't understand African history, don't understand the contributions we've made to this country, don't understand the history of this country and how it's treated African Americans and the laws and policies put in place, maldistributing wealth, power, and resources to the hands of Europeans. This influences the policies that people support, the politicians they vote for, etc. Okay, all this is connected. So this picture right here, this comes from the article from TheAHNShow.com. TheAHNShow.com. And the article from The Atlantic is called What Kids Are Really Learning About Slavery. What Kids Are Really Learning About Slavery. And this article, this is from February 1st, 2018. And it deals with the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center we just talked about. A new report finds that the topic of slavery is mistaught and often sentimentalized, and students are alarmingly misinformed as a result. So it shows, the article from The Atlantic shows this statue here, the Lincoln Emancipation Statue. The statue is actually paid for by former enslaved African people and erected in Washington, D.C. in 1876. The statue has been criticized for representing the history of slavery from a paternalistic perspective. Now, a lot of people protesting against it don't know the statue was paid for by former slaves. Okay? Now, my argument is, if you want to take the statue down, then you need to replace it either with one, a historical marker that tells the history of what was there and why it was taken down, or two, another statue that also more correctly deals with this history. Okay. A lot of people are protesting about it, but don't know the history behind it. Don't know it was former slaves that paid for it. Okay. I would like to read the writings of some of these former slaves that paid for it to understand their mindset at the time. Because many times when you have a statue like this, we'll look at it from the perspective of today, but not from the perspective of the mindset of people at that time, of Africans at that time who paid for it. You're talking about 1876. This is the year before Reconstruction ends. This was 11 years after slavery ended. This is 1 year before Reconstruction ends in 1877. Now, if we look at this article here from face-to-faceafrica.com, did you know the freed slave kneeling before Lincoln was Muhammad Ali's great-great-great-grandfather? Archer Alexander's fame came largely after his death. depicted in bronze, kneeling before President Abraham Lincoln. His story also received renewed attention recently amid recent calls for monuments connected to slavery and colonialism be pulled down. In the wake of global anti-racism protests sparked by the killing of George Floyd in the U.S., such controversial monuments became the target of Black Lives Matter protesters across the world, including the UK and Belgium. Now, I would encourage people to study history and the history behind these statues before you talk about taking them down. Some of them need to be taken down. Others, I mean, there was one place they took down a statue of Ulysses S. Grant. And Grant was on the Union side, a general in the Union fighting to free slaves. Now, at one point previously, Grant owned, I think it was one slave or something like that, but then set the slave free. But he fought on behalf of the Union, okay? He fought on behalf of the Union, and the Civil War eventually, 13th Amendment eventually freed the slaves. But then Grant becomes president of the U.S., and Ulysses S. Grant uses the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 to crack down on the Klan in South Carolina and declare martial law to protect African Americans. You gonna take his statue down? That doesn't even make sense. Go study the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. We've talked about that here on the show, and how President Ulysses S. Grant used the Ku Klux Klan Act to crack down on the Ku Klux Klan in South Carolina. Now, in the wake of global in the United States, the Confederate leaders and the explorer Christopher Columbus were toppled. Now, the reason why you have statues of Christopher Columbus in the United States is not because Columbus ever came to the land we call the United States. Columbus never came to this land. We deal with this in the online course. So those that are watching and taking my online course, you know we talk about this. I show you where Columbus went on his 4 voyages. Columbus he had 4 voyages. He first set sail August 3rd, 1492, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Columbus goes to the Caribbean. He goes into South America, things like this. He never comes to the land that we call the United States of America. The influence of Columbus in this land largely comes from Italian immigrants, okay, who pushed this and raised Columbus up to be a hero. Columbus was a master of genocide, but Columbus never came to this land. The closest Columbus came to this land was Cuba, which is 90 miles away. He never came to this landmass that we call the United States of America. He came to North America because the Caribbean, like Haiti and Jamaica, things like this, technically that's classified as North America. But the land we call the United States of America, this contiguous landmass of 48 states, the land we call the United States of America, he never came here. Closest he came here was Cuba. All right, now, okay, so we're talking about the one from, let's see, face-to-faceafrica.com. And we're going to have to wrap this up. I have to get out of here. I have a lot of work to do. Okay, so we're talking about this one here. Did you know the freed slave kneeling before Lincoln was Muhammad Ali's great-great-great-grandfather? Now, in Washington, D.C., protesters made attempts to tear down the controversial Emancipation Memorial, a statue of a freed slave kneeling before President Abraham Lincoln. Okay, now, just so people understand, I've said this before, and I stand by what I've said before. I'm against protesters tearing down any of these statues. I'm against protesters tearing down Confederate statues, tearing down the Emancipation Memorial statue. The reason why is because I'm against white supremacists tearing down statues honoring our heroes. I'm against if they attack the statue of Octavius Cato in Philadelphia. I'm against them if they attack the statue of Rosa Parks in I think they have one in Birmingham, Alabama, or Montgomery. Montgomery, I think it is. They just erected one of Rosa Parks. Statues of any of our other heroes. Okay, I'm against those being attacked. I'm against Confederate monuments being torn down by protesters. If city council takes them down, if the governor orders them taken down, that's fine. But protesters just going and attacking statues and tearing them down, well, what keeps white supremacists from tearing down statues honoring our heroes? In the place of the statues of Confederate monuments, Confederate heroes, etc., in place of those statues should be a historical marker that talks about the history of what was there and why it was taken down. Now, the bronze memorial in Lincoln Park was erected in 1876 to commemorate the Emancipation Proclamation. The executive order signed by Lincoln that ended slavery in the Confederacy didn't really end slavery in the Confederacy because they had no authority to end slavery. The North had no authority to end slavery in the Confederacy because the Confederacy, they separated from the Union, set up their own government, set up their own constitution, their own monetary system, set up their own laws. So you didn't have authority to end slavery in the Confederacy. Now, it was commissioned and paid for by African Americans after the Civil War, but now protesters say the position of the formerly enslaved black man at the feet of Lincoln is offensive and should be removed. I hope none of these protesters call each other the N-word. I'm just saying. I hope none of these protesters call each other the N-word and call African American women B's and H's and things like that. Okay, but some of us are backwards and think that's empowering, or say the N-word is a term of endearment. My argument would be, if you think the N-word is a term of endearment, I will argue that you are in an abusive relationship and you should get out. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow the people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So if you think that the N-word is a term of endearment, I would argue that you are in an abusive relationship and you should get out. For many, the statue does not in any way show how enslaved African Americans pushed for their own emancipation. As a matter of fact, scores of enslaved African Americans fought for their own freedom. More than that, more than scores. Such was the case of Alexander, the real life model for the newly freed slave in the controversial Emancipation Memorial, also called the Freedmen's Memorial. Now, the other thing is, if you take down these Confederate monuments and things like this, even if you take down the Emancipation statue here in Washington, D.C., you should put those in museums. You don't take them down and destroy them. You should put them in museums because you should have to teach about the history of them. They belong in museums. Okay, this is one of the reasons why museums exist. You don't just take them down because people already don't understand the history of the Confederacy. Americans are very ignorant of history. They already don't understand the history of the Civil War. So you take those monuments down and you put them in museums and teach about the history of. One of the things you should teach about is the history of the periods of time in this history when you had the most number of Confederate monuments being erected. Okay, that's basically around 1898, 1895, 1896, 1898, after Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, up until about 1915, you have a huge number of Confederate monuments being erected then. And this is tying into the Jim Crow laws being cemented, and attacks on African Americans and rising and lynchings and things like this. And then you have during the Civil Rights era, from say about somewhere around about 1960 to something like 1970, something like that, during the civil rights era. And this is a backlash to the civil rights movement. Okay, these are basically the two periods of times when you have the most number of Confederate monuments being erected, and you have schools being named after Confederate heroes and things like this, especially after Brown versus Board of Education, U.S. Supreme Court case in 1954. You see a whole backlash against Brown versus Board of Education. You see a big increase in the usage of vouchers for white children to go to school, especially poor white children to go to school, because they're trying to resegregate schools, and they're going to use the voucher system to resegregate schools, okay, and give vouchers to disadvantaged white children so they can go to schools. Now that it's illegal to have segregation based upon race, they're going to use the voucher system to do this, to resegregate schools on behalf of white children. Now, born enslaved near Richmond, Virginia, around 1813. Born enslaved near Richmond, Virginia, around 1813. Alexander's father, Alec Alexander, was sold while he was a young boy. Alec, A-L-E-C-K, Alec's crime was he had talked to other enslaved people about escape and freedom. In 1831, Alexander's owner died. Alexander was inherited by his owner's eldest son, Thomas. Thomas took Alexander to Missouri, separating him from the rest of his family. Now, Alexander, in 1831, Alexander's owner died. Alexander was inherited by his owner's eldest son, Thomas. Thomas took Alexander to Missouri, separating him from the rest of his family. Alexander's mom died 6 months after he had moved to Missouri. Alexander, who had then started working in a brickyard, was allowed to marry an African-American woman named Louisa, who was also enslaved on a nearby farm. Because we valued family even during slavery. We wanted to get married even during slavery. And then after slavery ends, one of the first things that we're doing is legally getting married. And the Freedmen's Bureau, the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees and Abandoned Lands, also known as the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau is helping us find lost loved ones, find lost family members, because we were separated and sold to different plantations, things like this. The Freedmen's Bureau is helping us put the family back together. And one of the first things we're doing is getting married, because we always valued family. Even during slavery, we valued family. Alexander, who had then started working in a brickyard, was allowed to marry an African-American woman named Louisa, who was enslaved on a nearby farm. After a few years, Thomas sold Alexander to the owner of Louisa, Alexander's wife. Alexander and his wife would have many children. When the Civil War began on April 12, 1861, in South Carolina, Alexander was still enslaved on a farm near St. Louis, Missouri. During the Civil War, Missouri did not secede from the Union. However, many Missourians were Confederate sympathizers. Missouri stayed loyal to the Union. Missouri, Delaware, Maryland, even Kentucky, they're going to stay loyal to the Union. And they're going to be allowed to keep their slaves. If they stay loyal to the Union, they could keep their slaves. Even Washington, D.C., it was 1862 that they abolished slavery in D.C. And the slave owners in D.C., they were paid reparations up to $300 for slaves that were owned. Lincoln signed off on the was the Emancipation Compensation Act or something like that of April 1862. The Emancipated Compensation Act of 1862. Lincoln signed off on that bill that paid reparations to the slave owners in Washington, D.C. Now, enslaved Africans didn't get anything. in general, but slave owners got compensation. So Missouri did not secede from the Union. However, Missourians were Confederate sympathizers, including Alexander's owner named Holman. Alexander had then heard reports of African Americans freeing themselves by joining the Union Army, and was quite prepared to do his part in breaking his chains. According to his biography written by William Greenleaf Eliot, a minister and abolitionist. In February of 1863, when Alexander got wind of the, hold on, let's see, just a second here. Let's bring this back up. In February 1863, when Alexander got wind of the fact that Confederate sympathizers in Missouri had cut the wooden timbers below a bridge that Union troops would cross on their way to Jefferson City, he walked 5 miles in the middle of the night to warn someone he knew was loyal to the Union. And let me see, is this showing up? Okay. Now, thanks to Alexander, the Union troops repaired the bridge in time before crossing it. But soon Alexander was found out, and there and then he knew he had to leave. He escaped one night, joining a group of African American men headed north to freedom. He escaped one night, joining a group of African American men headed north to freedom. But slave catchers caught them and locked them in a room in Missouri. Alexander escaped again, and in the long run met Eliot, who would later be his biographer. Eliot requested to buy Alexander's freedom from his owner, Holman. But the latter refused, but Holman refused, and instead sent men, including a policeman, to kidnap Alexander and jail him. But Eliot, with his social connections, was able to rescue Alexander. He sent him across the river to Alton, Illinois, which was not a slave state. Illinois abolished slavery in 1818. Okay, this is why when you deal with, some of you all saw the interview I did with Robin Ruth Simmons, Fifth Ward alderwoman, Robin Ruth Simmons, and they dealt with in Illinois. You had the city in Illinois that did reparations. Evanston, Illinois. Reparations for redlining. Okay. And I interviewed her for an hour here on the show. Evanston, Illinois did not have a history of slavery because Evanston was founded in the 1840s. Slavery was abolished in the 1818 in Illinois. But Evanston did have a long history of redlining. Okay. All right. So that's why the reparations in Evanston, Illinois is dealing with redlining, not slavery. Evanston does not, the city of Evanston with the 75,000 people, about 16% African American, Evanston doesn't have a history of slavery, but they do have a rampant history of redlining. Now, by June 1863, Alexander was able to return to Missouri to get closer to his wife and kids, following a change in Missouri's emancipation laws, right? Okay, so you can read the rest of this, but this Alexander spent his last days with his biographer before his death in 1880. Decades later, DNA evidence would link Muhammad Ali to Alexander. The family of the boxing legend discovered through family DNA research in 2018 that the historic enslaved man Alexander was Muhammad Ali's great-great-great-grandfather. Okay, so Muhammad Ali's great-great-great-grandfather, 3 times great, was the person who posed for this statue as the newly freed slave. This was in 1876. Read this article here from face-to-faceafrica.com. Did you know the freed slave kneeling before Lincoln was Muhammad Ali's great-great-great-grandfather? This is written by Mildred Europa Taylor for face-to-faceafrica.com in February 26, 2021. Okay. All right. Hey, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, and then also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. We have 6 nights a week. When you do it through Cash App, be sure to type in $ the AHN show, SHOW, unless you click on the link here. And also we have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Be sure to register for the online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 9-week online course. It's about 18 hours of teaching. 9-week online course, meets Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the classes live, so you can join us live. All the classes are archived also on demand, so you can watch them anytime. So if you miss part of the class or what have you, you can go back and watch it. That's fine. As soon as you register, you can watch the class from this past Saturday. Okay. So we're going to post a link here. And then lastly, this article I was talking about from NBC News that dealt with critical race theory, how Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in school. Back, the article I was referencing from NBC News, how Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. In the article, it talks about, hold on, where is it? Right here. In the article, it goes back to 2020 and the fight over the 1619 Project. So the article I was referencing was from the one from NBCnews.com, how Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. How Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. This is from May 10th, 2021. And if you scroll down, it talks about how a cluster of bills that aim to prohibit teaching critical race theory in K through 12 schools have popped up in the last year. Lawmakers behind an Idaho bill said critical race theory, quote, tries to make kids feel bad. Okay, this is in Idaho, and it's been banned in Idaho. The governor Brad Little in Idaho signed that bill into law, banning the teaching of critical race theory. Okay, in Tennessee, legislators accused such practices of, quote, promoting division. These are buzzwords that you hear. You hear that is divisive. It promotes division, all different types of things like this. Now, meanwhile, a Rhode Island bill bans teaching the idea that the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist.